are packing up items inside of legislation that have nothing to do directly with that legislation.
Correct.
And we're facing this again in 2 more days.
Isn't that how it's always done?
Pork barrel politics have been around for a long time, okay? But now I think it's gotten so polarized that the constituents aren't even considered at this point in terms of the debate, in terms of why this is good for the country or what does this have to do with improving liberty, anything along that line. Those debates aren't happening. Okay. Yes, we have a two-party system for a reason. We have opposition happening in the House and the Senate for a reason. The problem is we don't have two functioning bodies who have that capability to engage in civil discourse in true opposition that has to do with legislation. It's in true opposition that has to do with nothing other than partisanship, period.
Okay. I think that's pretty legitimate what you're saying.
That's what I'm trying to articulate there.
The partisanship's way out of control, and we've been saying that for a while now. Actually, and
it's something new. There's no news here.
But some people said that remember how Congress used to spend more time in town and less time at home, and I think it was Olympia Snowe or one of the retiring senators and Congress people had said, we knew each other as people before. In the federal in the Congress, we knew each other on both sides of the aisle as people. We socialized more. We had relationships. When people started going home to their districts more, it was mandated that they would change the ratio of time spent in D.C.
Right.
Okay, then it started to break down the social relations, the personal relations between people.
Because they were going back to the districts?
Because they were having less time with their with their peers.
Yeah,
and I thought that was an interesting argument to make.
Yeah, I don't agree with that necessarily, because there's plenty of time spent together in the chambers and in their offices and in all of the special interest groups that are plunging them together in social interaction as well. The parties and the receptions and those kinds of things.
Claim.
Yeah, I have to disband or dispute that.
Okay. But maybe we're getting off topic.
They don't want to go home anymore back to the constituents because their constituents are lighting them up in their town hall meetings as well. At least some are. Yeah, so we're getting off topic. So let's bring this back then to the memo. I made some claims here that I want to go through and back up a little bit in terms of how this is becoming so divisive. What irks me the most, and this is where I'm going to need the most control in, as far as my language is concerned.
Where's my roll of tape?
It's right over there.
Right. No, I would never censor you, by the way.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I know I've talked over you a time or two to
It's all right.
maybe bring us back, but
part
it's
of
not
our agreement.
my attempt of censoring. The point that I want to get to, I hear the director in the back, just make that point. The point that I'm trying to get to is the Republican memo takes the Justice Department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation and throws them under the bus.
Yes, sir, it does.
It throws two organizations, well, one institution, one organization that is established to go through and guarantee, if not enforce, some level of peaceable existence for the citizens of the United States. Those are two wrong terms there. I'm not pulling the right terms together here. Right. The FBI exists to go through and investigate and protect American citizens across state borders. And right now, their main charge is to do that against threats of terrorism. Now, the FBI hasn't been a perfect institution. Neither has the Justice Department, but neither has the executive branch, nor we can't go through and look at anybody and say, well, they're spotless.
Comprised of fallible
they're all
people.
comprised of fallible people in terms of what's going on.
Right.
Was there a breach in terms of the legality of getting information, in terms of investigating the individuals involved in these charges of Russian collusion?
You mean Carter Page specifically?
Right, yes.
Well,
I'm
my
speaking.
impression is that, without being privy to information, is that there was more evidence besides the Steele report that was used to the FISA court.
Steele being he's the British spy who brought this thing together, but there was more than that happening. As I read the memo, I read the Republican memo. Obviously, I haven't read the Democratic memo, the Nunes memo, and with references including Yahoo, it loses its credibility to me. And it's clear that the evidence in there is cherry-picked. We're not getting the whole picture, and that was the Democrats and several Republicans' concern in the House in terms of releasing this memo to begin with was it's clearly biased in its calling out bias on the part of the Justice Department and on the part of the FBI. What fries my brain is that we have a sitting president of the United States of America who has no qualms at all of throwing the FBI under the bus, so to speak, in terms of saving his own face, in terms of trying everything he can do to go through and discredit an investigation. And it's just an investigation. Allegations haven't even been brought forward yet.
What's interesting to me, if a person is genuinely convinced of their innocence, I realize that law enforcement can make mistakes.
Shut the hell up and let them do their job.
Right, go for it and exonerate me, you know?
But the more he pushes back, the more guilty the more it starts to stink.
What's he afraid of?
And, you know, I would be saying the same thing if we were dealing with a Democrat in office, okay? So I want to make it clear to you and to our audience that this isn't a political bias of me coming forward with this. Am I biased against Donald Trump? I'm critical. Does that make me biased? I mean, media will go through and be critical of Donald Trump. Does that make them biased in that respect? This is a conversation that we go through and pound to the ground in terms of my students and examining what's happening in terms of journalism.
You can't confuse criticism with bias.
With bias. No. The answer is no. The answer is no. It's not the same thing. That's why we have the fourth estate.
Okay, now, we were talking about the Nunes memo, which I'd rather call it than the Republican, frankly, but the Nunes memo, and then there's the memo.
Because you're a Republican, you're trying to distance yourself from that? Is that what's going on?
Frankly, yes.
Okay, all right.
Frankly,
I can
yes.
respect that,
okay.
I see.
Now,
but I just wanted to...
Sure, call me out, fine, do it.
Call you out on that.
Okay, I hope you're proud of yourself. Okay, then there's the other issue is that there's the memo itself, and then there's our reaction to the memo, the conclusions we draw from the memo. And, you know, I mentioned earlier that Chris Stewart, our representative in the Congress who's running for re-election this coming year, he came out and said, you know, his comments with Chris Wallace, was that one way or the other, he does not want Robert Mueller and the special investigation to be damaged by this, that investigation needs to go forward and reach a conclusion. That's the kind of an answer I would like to hear, is that because of there may or may not be some flaws in their gathering techniques, the FBI, or they may have violated something, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. That doesn't taint and negate the whole effort of completing an investigation by the special counsel, prosecutor, investigator. Okay, so he's lined up with me in that regard. You know, keep the investigation going.
Okay.
Now, are there other people who are saying, oh, well, throw the whole thing out on account of this issue?
On account of, well, no, I don't think anybody's that stupid.
Okay.
To go through and take what little evidence exists within the memo and say, well,
okay, so what is
that would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
What does the memo end up meaning then in the end? Just some lame
well, the end
attempt
it ends up being divisive.
I mean, put it on the list of all the other things that are divisive.
That's the problem is, and that's what I mean by, I guess, the fact that we're not making any progress here. Okay. A number of comments that are coming up here on our, one of which happens to be from our camera operator. She says, I don't think criticism is bias, but it can turn into being biasism by blaming game, and that takes away from civil voice. Yeah, there was. And your husband chimes in and says there was, but I'm not sure what he's referring to on that.
Okay.
That was a while ago.
Yeah, he needs to be a little more articulate maybe, but I will say too, when you were reading those comments, I was getting a thought, but my thought was, this whole conversation, to be civil and to be productive, needs nuance. The complexities around it need to be constantly recognized. So we can't throw out the baby with the bathwater idea. We can't just...
Where does that nuance come from? Does it come from you and I sitting here doing the show? Is that where it comes from?
Hopefully we can bring some nuance to it. Okay, but the other people that are discussing it and talking about it, when they report on it, especially the people on the news networks and on the, you know, the mainstream broadcast.
So I've been watching those, as you can probably imagine, since you always accuse me of being some kind of a media
addict,
addict that way. And the coverage on this has been fascinating to go through and watch on both sides. And honestly, I haven't been to MSNBC and I haven't been to Fox. I've been stayed in the middle to see what's been happening within that. And it just boils down to a discrediting of the memo. The Democrat memo coming forward now, the Schiff memo, is, if I'm going to follow your lead, I'll call it the Schiff memo and not the
please
Democratic
do, because
memo.
I think that's demonstrates a bit of nuance.
Sure.
Okay.
Good. Okay. I'm with you. I would agree that way.
Okay.
Some analysts are saying, why would the Democrats even respond in terms of actually validating the Nunes memo to begin with?
Oh, you mean like it doesn't deserve a response?
Right.
Well, I don't think you can say that. You may not find it credible, but just because you don't consider it credible doesn't mean it doesn't deserve a response.
And I would agree. I think it does deserve a response.
Yeah. It's too powerful left there.
Right.
Okay.
Again, it's a game. It's shenanigans at its best in terms of politicizing something that really is too.
You're upset because it's undermining basic institutions in the country.
I am.
That's really where the meat of it is for you, right?
It is. I have family involved with these institutions, and they're great people, and they've taken an oath to go through and to protect and to serve the Constitution of the United States, and to have the president go through and throw them under the bus is just despicable. To call Democrats who decided not to applaud his rhetoric during the State of the Union address, even though later the White House came out and said it was just a joke, which kind of sums up his entire administration. Mm-hmm. To call him, he's calling these Democrats treasonous. Well, actually, he begs to send license, and he says, well, somebody called them treasonous. And yeah, I guess we can call them that. He doesn't even take responsibility for his own crap.
Before he said treasonous, he said un-American. And he was not joking about that.
He was not joking.
He was emotional and unhappy when he was saying un-American. Well, to me, that's even egregious. That statement
is the rhetoric of a dictator. And we can't go through and reclassify anything that is spoken, especially by the commander-in-chief.
Right.
When it's out there, it's ricocheting, it's making its marks, it's doing its damage. You can't take it back, an axiom of communication there. And you can't go through and reframe it later on and say, oh, well, it was just a joke.
Yes. Tempering what you just said with the way people speak, individuals speak. Some people speak very literally and mean exactly what they say as much as possible. Other people speak in more broad, figurative terms and are less attached to literal meanings and going more for impact or for a. I'm just saying the way he speaks as an individual is not what I'd call presidential in the sense that it's more like
he doesn't have the critical ability or the diplomatic ability to speak like a president. But see, that's the thing that endeared him to his base.
I realize that because he comes across as authentic.
No,
and he does come across that way because he's just himself no matter what he's doing.
But his self is a narcissistic power monger.
Well,
I guess there's authenticity. The definition of character is how you are in public versus how you are in private being the same thing.
Okay.
So he's despicable both in the public eye and in the Oval Office when he's by himself in that respect.
Okay, so let me bring it back to that because when McKay Coppins was here last week talking, I asked him, I said, can you, in your opinion, separate, in your mind, do you separate the character of the president from the job he's doing and the decisions he has to make? Like a lot of people have said, I don't like Trump.
Oh, like exactly like how that was done during the Obama administration.
Okay, I don't like Trump, but I voted for Trump because I'm.
That's a cop-out.
Okay, so what McKay said, because he's been doing political reporting now since 2012. Right. He's seems like a rational, thoughtful person. He said, because of the nature of the decisions that a president has to make, his character and judgment are tantamount. They are of utmost importance. And he also said when he accidentally ended up spending, he was getting an interview with candidate Trump up in New Hampshire. They were supposed to go to New York, but it was fogged in, snowed in, so Trump took him to Mar-a-Lago in Florida for a weekend. And he said, I was struck by his attempts to impress me. I'm a nobody. And here's this person constantly calling up and reminding to me things he's accomplished, going out of his way to impress me and gain my approval. He said, I was struck by that. So he is a man, you know, use the term narcissistic, but he strikes me as a man that's fundamentally seeking approval. And that's why when the Democrats don't stand up and applaud, it cuts him to the core. It's very personally distressing. So I kind of get why he's reacting that way.
Oh, it's not a mystery, I think, to most people, why he's responding the way he's responding.
So then can we filter having an insight
so can we go
into
through
his
and say,
psyche?
well,
he's
just an egomaniac anyway, so we can expect that kind of behavior. I think that's the whole problem. I think that's why we're in this situation to begin with, is because we dismissed him, we excused him, we tolerated him, and now it's not even, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not even out of the norm. We go, oh yeah, it's just Trump. It's just 45. And that's the problem. What was once marginalized behavior is now mainstream, and we're tolerating it, and we can't keep tolerating it.
Don't you think that a lot of our media broadcasts are of the same ilk?
Certainly. They're going through and perpetuating
this discourse.
The same concepts.
And I don't know if I'd call it uncivil, I would call it unthinking and uncritical discourse. And I would call it disingenuous and a lot of things.
You have a tendency to kind of dismiss his whole narcissism as just being part of who he is, but
no, I'm not saying it's okay.
Okay, all right.
I'm just saying
his behavior with the reporter down in Mar-a-Lago is part of the 12 indicators of narcissism in terms of his constantly seeking approval of people who aren't really of much importance around him to begin with.
It is very curious, and you would think a person like that would have a weakness as a leader.
They don't perceive weakness. They only perceive weakness in others. And when I say in others, it's in any others who go through and contradict him.
This is a narcissistic tendency.
Yeah. If you're either with me or against me. And if you're against me, then I'll do what I can and go through and put you down, put you out.
Right.
If you're with me, I will praise you. You will be the subject of every
and if you're not,
I can
you're
put
fired.
Out there. You're fired. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Well, there have been a lot of firings in this administration.
Yeah, there have.
Well, so what are we left to think? What are we left to do in this circumstance?
Well, this is where
be constructive, right?
I don't know. I feel powerless at this point.
Well, okay, let's look at, for example, back to Chris Stewart. He's running for re-election, and he had a position on this recently. If I understand it correctly, he didn't have anything negative to say. They were defending the release on that. He's on that House Intelligence Committee.
Chris Stewart is an apologist for everything that's been going on.
Well, I will say that his response to Chris Wallace wasn't really satisfying about that. He didn't add any nuance, for sure, to the conversation, any depth to it. So I was a little bit disappointed.
Regardless of party affiliation, Republicans and Democrats alike need to come together and call out the president for who he is and for what he's doing. Period.
Well, some have, and then they're not running for re-election.
Right. They're retiring in droves. We have Republicans, more Republicans retiring in this midterm election than ever before in the history.
Yeah, which is, it almost feels like the rats are leaving the ship.
Yeah, and well, that's pretty quick for you as a Republican to call them rats in that respect.
Well, it's an old metaphor, like the tempest in the teapot,
right.
And the other one I used recently, baby in the bathwater, right. But they seem appropriate somehow.
Yeah, it's, yeah. Wow.
All right, what can we do? Back to that. What can we do?
What can we do?
Yeah.
Well, I would say write to your representatives. I have shot off many an email and snail mail and things of that nature with nary a response.
When you write, try to have a logical, persuasive argument. Try to have some research behind what it is you're claiming,
right.
and display a working knowledge of the voting record.
You in general try to go through and write, not me specifically.
Oh yes, Correct. You were saying write to your congressman. Well, when you do write to your congressman, display an awareness of their voting record and their positions, and then have some facts to back up your claims. And then also make a powerful request for a vote or a bill, something that you, or even a response, something you want them to do.
Give your representative context as well. Let them know that you are a voter. Let them know that you might be an opinion shaper as well. If not within your community, at least within your own family that way. And we have opinion shapers within this community. Just the very cultural nature of our community goes through and says we have a tendency to listen to each other, not necessarily creating echo chambers, but at least to listen to each other. So all these good ideas in terms of making a difference. And I was probably quick to say that I feel helpless. I don't feel helpless.
No, you don't. Good.
But I'm angry, and my anger has a tendency maybe to make me feel that way.
Well, I think a person can feel a little overwhelmed by the situation that we have, that we're dealing with.
Well, if this is whelmed, I'm sure I'm over at this point.
Yeah.
If you have more to say once the show is over, please feel free to go through and continue to comment on our Facebook feed. We appreciate those of you who have made a contribution so far within that, even though you might be here in the studio with us as you're shooting what's going on. Special thanks to our crew as well. That's something I've left off here on each show to come in. This is students to go through and run the camera.
Behind the cameras, right?
Yeah, and we appreciate your framing us up the way you're doing that as well. What's going to be on the table for next week?
I can hardly wait to hear. No.
Maybe the Democratic memo will be released.
Maybe if we get some comments on Facebook with a request or two, too, that would be interesting to take up something from the community, offered by the community.
Right. Well, it's been Talking Point Live. We'll see you next week at live at 9:30 on Wednesday. Thanks for joining us.